Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hof, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. Welcome to the Birth Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Hof, BSN RN. I am a wife, a mother of two, and a nurse specializing in the care of women and newborns. In this podcast, we will share powerful journeys of birth givers with the goals of lifting the veil on the birth experience, healing through sharing, and beginning an open conversation to strengthen trust and promote transparency between birthing people and healthcare providers. Today I have with me Joyanna Delshad, BSN RN. Joyanna is a mom of four, a nurse, and the founder of Happily Mom. Joyanna is here today to share her birth experience. Joyanna, welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks, Kelly.
I know you have a lot to tell us, so let's jump right in.
Yes. So again, I have four kids, and it is surprising to me as well. Everybody's like, how do you do it? Like, with all the help. I would not do it if I did not have all the help. So when I first became a mom, it was like a huge surprise to me because I decided to take this job out of state. So my husband and I moved out of our hometown where our families were. And I took a job that was out of state, but it was a big transition for us because neither of us had ever, for a significant amount of time, lived away from family. And the night before my first day of work, I took a pregnancy test because I realized with all of the moving and buying a house that I forgot that I hadn't had a period in a while. Yes, I'm one of those people who's like, wait, I think it's been 2 months, and it had been a minute, right? So many people are so organized, and they have a little alarm in their phone, and they anticipate their period 3 days before it arrives. No, I was like 60 days late. I had no idea. So that's how I found out I was a mom. I was kind of surprised that I reacted the way that I did. I will say I was shocked. I cried, not because I was positively anticipated, because I was totally overwhelmed. I did not feel like I was ready to be a mom. This was not on my radar. Now I moved away from family. My husband had just lost his job. And so it was a really rocky time. It was a rocky time in our marriage. And so I came out of that bathroom and I did punch him. Okay, we'll be honest. That happened. We probably had hugs after that, but so that's how I found out. So that was the starting point. So I had a lot to learn. I did not had premeditated visions of me driving a minivan and pushing a stroller. It was, this was wild. It was a huge adjustment. At the time I was working in critical care. I worked for a very large hospital and I worked in all of their ICUs. And I didn't know much about birth at all outside of, the little tiny bits you learn in nursing school. Well, fast forward through that pregnancy, I was sitting in a Lamaze class and I just knew enough to know I wanted to prepare. And I've always been someone who loves information. I like to educate myself so I can make informed decisions. I did not realize how many moms go into the delivery room or into labor without knowing what their options are. And the Lamaze class that I had taken, it was like 6 weeks or something. There was this question posed: who in here is considering an unmedicated natural birth? And I wasn't really sure. I hadn't really thought about that. You'd think at that point I had, because I was like 36 weeks pregnant, now was the time to decide. But I sort of went into it open for whatever, because this was my first round. And no one had told me that I could start prodromal labor. And I have become over these 4 pregnancies very familiar with prodromal labor. So for anybody listening, prodromal labor, you essentially go into early labor, but it continues for so many hours and then just stops. And there's not a ton of rhyme or reason to it, but it's very emotionally exhausting. So my first birth, I went into labor 39 weeks and 5 days. I'd gone to bed late because I was nesting. Now, after teaching birth classes, I'm like, oh, that was my hormone surge, like keeping me up until midnight, folding teeny tiny baby washcloths and scrubbing the baseboards of my nursery that my child's not even going to be in for like the next 6 months. So who cares if the baseboards are clean, Now I know. So I totally killed my opportunity to actually sleep. And of course, I woke up at 2 a.m. and I was having the strongest contractions I'd ever had. So I was like super excited. But I was like, okay, I don't want to be like the false alarm girl. I totally was her. I waited. The contractions continued. And they told me at the office, like, hey, call when your contractions are 5 minutes apart. Now, many years into this, I now give different advice to new parents. But I went into the hospital. They checked me and everything was tight. I was not dilated. My contractions sort of faded and disappeared once I got to the hospital. So of course I felt silly. I felt kind of embarrassed. I felt like I didn't know my body. They were kind at the hospital, but as a first-time mom, it was really vulnerable for me because I don't know, you go into this and a lot of moms will expect my water is going to break, but apparently my water doesn't break until I'm literally about to give birth. So that never has been an early sign for me. So there's not been this definitive moment of, am I in labor? It's always been this big question mark, which has been really emotionally exhausting. So that was, I think, Friday morning. I went home, took a nap. All day Friday, contractions were sort of in and out, come and go, sort of like classic early labor. They're not strong and committed. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, they were intense enough for me to head into the hospital. And my labor continued. I was so stressed because I'd never been under this process before. I didn't know what to expect with the pain. And I didn't have any hard and fast commitment that I had to go unmedicated. It was just sort of, I know there's several options and I'm just going to kind of go with what's available. So had some Nubain. That helped give me a little bit of break, helped my mind come back into my body. Those times we've seen, and Kelly, you and I have worked in labor and delivery together and with a variety of different births. And there's this point in time, not all moms experience it, but I see a lot of moms experience where the pain gets so intense that your mind as a safety coping mechanism will sort of kind of like go third party, right? Where you're sort of feeling like, and moms will describe this, I felt like I was having an out of body experience, like I was seeing myself or experiencing myself. And that's a pretty normal phenomenon. It's now learning more about emotional health and psychology, you realize, oh yeah, that's a coping mechanism because your body's like, whoa, this is crazy. What's going on with us here, right? So the Nubain kind of helped me get back in my head in the game and gave me about an hour's break. I felt really weird on it. I kind of felt like I was drunk. Now I know why they say like stay in bed while you have this, because the last thing we want is a mom tripping and falling while she's like about to give birth. So I plateaued at about 6 centimeters and
Are you pregnant and planning a hospital birth? You don't need a birth plan. You need a birth vision. In my opinion, birth plans set you up for failure. Yep, I said it. Hear me out before you turn off this podcast. You may think that by downloading a generic birth plan, it means you're in control. The truth is, it's not that simple. No one can control exactly how their birth will go. There are way too many variables. What every pregnant person wants is to walk into the hospital pregnant and to walk out with a healthy newborn in their arms. The journey in between is the murky part. It's hard to know what issues might come up that need to be addressed. If you focus your energy on a birth vision rather than giving your power to a birth plan, you can empower yourself to make the best choices for you and your baby. That's why you need to get into my Empowered Hospital Birth program. As a labor nurse and mindset coach, I can help guide you through the process of maintaining the calm autonomy that will help you achieve the birth vision you desire. In my Empowered Hospital Birth program, I will help you identify the source of anxiety you have surrounding hospital birth, fill in knowledge gaps to make sure that you are fully informed and confident, learn key phrases so you can better communicate with your medical team, emotionally process your fears so that they don't hold power over you. Go to kellyhof.com/empowered to book a free 30-minute private birth vision call, where we will identify your top fears and must-haves and gain clarity on exactly how you want to feel in the birth space. That's kellyhof.com/empowered. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey.
Well, fast forward a little bit in my story. I've taught childbirth for several years. I think I spent about 4.5 years educating new parents on childbirth and understanding what your body does. And what happens a lot of times when you retain that tension, your muscles hold that tension, and your sphincters, which are the little doors in the body, the sphincter of the cervix won't relax and dilate. So when you carry all this internal tension and pain, and we're doing this shoulders are up to the ears, and I'm, fighting against the contractions, I'm resisting the pain, sort of like you would guard your stomach if you're having stomach pain. When you have that approach to pain and it's sort of your foe or your enemy and you're trying to get rid of it, what that does accidentally is it slows your progress oftentimes, because from a physiologic standpoint, the hormones don't release that actually relax that cervix to make it supple so that you can open and dilate. Now, I didn't know any of this, right? I was trying to survive. So I think I was 6 centimeters, I want to say, for 3 hours. And that was really disheartening, because it felt to me like when someone would come in and check, that I was hearing them say, "You're not doing anything." And I knew I was working really hard over here. I am effectively miserable right now. And we were trying all the things. I had a great team. I think, one of the biggest, most important things to communicate, and that I've communicated over the years with parents, is who you invite onto your team is really important. Do you have people that are going to build the anxiety in the room, that are going to make you feel pressured, like you need to be making progress faster? And my body is slow. It just takes its time and it kicks into gear when it wants to. And, in some of my other births, I experienced what it felt like to sort of let the pressure off and be present with how my body wants to labor. But with my first, I was really encouraged because my mom was there. She's very hands-on. She also fielded so many questions from my husband, because I'm one of 5 siblings. So she's had some experience, and she's a great person. She's the kind of person that you want in a room, who's calming. They bring order to the situation. They help you talk through things. They don't raise the anxiety, the stress, and the drama level, if you will. And when you have a mindset of, hey, we need to move things along, unless there's an actual medical indication. And Kelly, we've seen those scenarios, right? We've been in the rooms where there is a medical indication, your baby or you are in danger. We need to move things along. But a lot of times that's not actually the case. And it might be a preference thing that we're moving things along, whether it's a physician preference thing, a personal pressure thing, like you think you need to, or maybe it might be your own personal objective. So it was helpful for me to have a team around me that was calming, reassuring, helped me make decisions that I felt good about and that were right for me in that scenario. Later on, I realized I got an epidural, and within an hour's time, I want to say, I went from 6 centimeters to complete. I was 9.5, but my baby was posterior. And so the back of the head was rotated inoptimally. So it was making it harder for me to progress in labor and him to descend. And I was frustrated about that later, years down the road, because I thought to myself, man, somebody with more experience in this should have caught on that he was posterior by the way I was presenting. And from what I learned in birth education, I could tell that I was posterior, rewinding back on that scenario, right? This is where the pain is manifesting. This is what we're seeing in a clinical perspective. And so I was kind of annoyed that my nurse or my doctor did not pick up on the fact that the baby was posterior. And that was what was causing this delay in the progress. But once we got that epidural, I just like this wash of calm came back to me. I was thinking straight again. My husband was more relaxed and I was more present in my body and with my body. I was really concerned because I'd heard women talk about how they lost sensation and they couldn't feel the process of their baby being born with an epidural. But it wasn't like that for me. Now, I did request that I start out with the lowest dose possible. And I wanted to do that because when we're talking about medications, you can always titrate up. Most of the time you can get more, but I wanted to start with the baseline of having the most engagement, pelvic engagement possible so that I could be effective in pushing. So I specifically requested that from my anesthesiologist. And that's something you can request. So if we're talking like empowering you and your choices and your options so that you know what your options are. I remember the OB asking me if I wanted her to break my water. I know that the first time I said, I don't think I'm ready for that. Let's look at that later. But after I got the epidural and I calmed down, it was right at shift change. And I knew they put me on a peanut ball because that's when they realized baby was posterior because he was low enough to tell. They put me on a peanut ball and it was quick. I was like, man, I'm ready. This is a lot of pressure. I feel like I need to push. And for women who haven't had that experience before, oftentimes it's sort of like, when you've been holding your poop for too long and you got to go and like, I don't got another minute left. I have got to go. It's sort of one of those. Okay. So I was thankful that I could feel that. So when they checked, they're like, you are almost complete. You're 9.5 centimeters. We're going to go ahead and break your water. And now looking back at that, I'm like, why do you need to break my water? They don't need to. That's not a medical indication. You don't have to break water. But oftentimes it's worded like that. Like, we need to break your water. No, you don't. You don't actually. And that's part of that learning journey. Like, I don't regret any of those decisions, but looking at it, I appreciate the fact that I'm informed now because my deliveries after that looked different. I felt like I was more in the driver's seat. So that was first delivery. They broke the water. We were pushing for a bit. Heart rate was dropping. And I really appreciate my OB. She was so calm. She said, Joyanna, baby's heart rate is dropping. It's safe right now, but I just want you to let you know that if it becomes unsafe, I'm going to tell you. So a couple minutes later, a few pushes later, she said, okay, I need you to deliver this baby on this push, or I'm going to have to go in and get him. And when you tell a mom that, there's this like superhuman strength that comes over you of like, wait, did you just tell me my small child is in danger and it's up to me to bring them into safety? On it, right? Like, you just like shift into this beast mode. So here comes like the inner beast of me, and boom, like I got that baby out, that push. I don't know where he was or how far along. I don't know. This is my first rodeo, right? But he came out one way or another. And when he came out, he had this little wire attached to his head. And I was like, would you look at that? They had put an internal electrode monitor on his scalp and not told me. She also didn't tell me that she had given, she didn't ask me permission to give me an episiotomy. She said, I'm cutting you open so that we make sure that there's enough room for baby to come out and there's not any issues. Okay. So it was like, I guess if she was arguing her stance in court, she could say I had consent because she said, okay, right? But the way that it's presented, that's not consent. Not from a legal standpoint, right? Medical consent is I explain it. I allow you to ask questions. And you could argue easily like it was an emergency scenario. We needed to just move this forward. I don't know heart rate details, right? Working in LD, I know those scary numbers that we all want to stay away from. But it was sort of one of those, well, it's not like I'm going to say no. Like, you just told me you're going to have to go in and extract my baby. And then, oh, by the way, I'm cutting you open so I can get in there and there's no issues. So I had an episiotomy. I don't even know that I knew that's what she was doing. So that was a little weird. I think about that later. I'm like, I don't really like that. I don't really like how it went down. But he came out, he had the electrode and they took it out. And I never noticed like a little bruised spot on his head or anything. And he was safe and healthy. And then my daughter, round two was my sweet little princess. So that was my additional round of working through prodromal labor. I had a doula at that point. With my first birth, I didn't have a doula. But I had tons of support. And I had a friend who was training to be a doula, and she had just a lot of those nurturing type of qualities. And I think I had a birth photographer with my first, like I had a crew. I had like a 5-man team, right? I was that girl. But second delivery, I had a doula. Now that I've gone through this process where I have a little better understanding of what to expect, I think I'd like to try to go naturally. And I was open, so I wasn't totally going to be devastated if my plan didn't work out. And I think that's one big thing I would encourage moms to don't get so committed to one way that you then villainize the other alternatives. And I think that's kind of where I sit in the middle of the holistic, minimally invasive birth methodology, and on the other side, the clinical medical birth process. And being able to sit in both sides and see the pros and cons of both philosophy. I see, sadly, where some women have become so convinced that it needs to be this one certain way, let's just say the natural route, that you end up causing more problem for yourself, more emotional damage, and sometimes putting your child at risk or causing even more invasive procedures to have to happen. And in hindsight, looking at my first birth, I'm really thankful that I got an epidural, because if I hadn't, I would have plateaued and been stuck there and probably had to have moved into a C-section. And Kelly, you're nodding your head. Like, we've seen that where you're so vehemently opposed to an epidural. But I think a well-timed epidural is an exceptional tool. I'm all for empowering parents to make the choice that's right for them and not projecting the right choice on them. And it swings both ways in the natural mind of things, like, oh, this is the premier way. Don't have any medication. Like, this is the gold standard. I'm just here to tell you there is no gold standard, because really it's just unpredictable what's going to happen. And we could, get off on a rabbit trail of all the different stories that we could both tell of those things, and people we know, people we've helped on a clinical perspective. But when it came to my daughter, I learned that my body needed to take things slow. And so my objective was to stay home and labor at home until I knew that I was in a good, sustained labor pattern and rhythm. And that is part of becoming a student of your own body, in your own journey, in your own birth. And with her, I remember one of my friends had come over earlier that morning, and she came and delivered like a big bag of baby girl clothes because I didn't have any. After she did that, I started having contractions a couple hours later. My husband was out of town for the day. He had driven a couple hours away. I was 37 weeks. So I was 37-0. And here, all of a sudden, I lose my mucus plug. I start having contractions, and I just started freaking out. Because, listen, I did not have any girl swaddle blankets. That's it. That's why I was freaking out. I wasn't freaking out because my husband was like so far away, or because it was 37 weeks. Y'all, I just had boy swaddle blankets. Like, let's be serious. That's a real problem. It's you are inviting your first girl into the world, and all you got is these dumb blue striped blankets. Get out of here, man. So of course I call my doula, and I am in tears, and she's like trying to decipher, are you in tears because you're so far progressed in your labor process that you're getting emotional? Are you panicking? What's going on here? So as we start to talk through, I told her, she's like, Joyanna, I will go to the store and buy you some girl swaddle blankets. I was like, oh, okay. Great. That's helpful. Okay. Well, let me call my husband. So we all got the things that we need in order to feel like our head is in the game, right? Like, okay, I can do this. I can birth a child. Here's what I need. And for me, in all honesty, I have to have my toenails painted, a fresh haircut, and apparently the appropriate swaddle blankets. So I went in and out of a dance with prodromal labor for the next 7 days. And I was so worn out by the end of it. We had our doula over, I want to say 2 or 3 times, where I would wake up in the middle of the night. And that's another hallmark sign of prodromal labor. Your uterus is tired and it's worn out from holding this big, heavy baby up all day. And so maybe it's at nighttime, you start getting crampy and you have these Braxton Hicks contractions, or maybe you wake up in the middle of the night and you've got this whole like, did you hydrate enough? Is it really labor? How do you define labor? And so for me, there was so much mental game that went into it before we even officially started knowing if you were having a baby today. And then there's the external social pressure of like, if I got to notify everybody, but then my contractions disappear after 6 hours and I don't know when they're coming back. It could be that night. It could be 2 days later. So it's really tiring. And I always just tell moms like, and dads, Dad, the last thing mom needs from you is you doubting her that she knows her body. Because as women who go through prodromal labor, it's a huge mental battle of like, am I just crazy? Am I dumb? Is this even a contraction? I don't know what else you'd call it. And then you try to advocate for yourself to your provider and you still feel kind of silly. You still feel like maybe I'm being a drama queen. I'm not trying to, but I also don't want to like miss something, especially when we're talking 37 weeks now. I realize in context, it's not that big of a deal when we're talking about maturity and readiness for birth from the baby side of it. But as a mom, it was shocking to me because I went 39 and 5 with my little guy before I had anything. So that was Everly. I think, let's see what happened with her. When I went into the hospital, finally, the day she delivered, I was 5 centimeters. I was so proud of myself, though. I remember calling the doula. I think it was the day before I stayed in labor. And we were out on a walk about 3-4 o'clock in the morning because I just needed a reset. I was frustrated the contractions were going away. I was frustrated because I didn't know how much longer I was going to be pregnant. And I felt kind of embarrassed that I kept having to call her to come over to our house just to send her home. And I remember she was just so gracious and so supportive and so kind. And I just fell asleep on the couch in a side-lying position while somebody was like stroking my hair, rubbing my back. And she just quietly just slipped out. And I thought, oh my gosh, I feel so honored. I feel respected as a mother, that I'm not dumb or over exaggerating, and that I'm not inconveniencing you by making you show up for nothing. I think as women, we tend to talk ourselves down a lot, right? We have all these internal vulnerabilities that come out in the birthing experience. And I've studied emotional health for about a little over a decade. And being immersed in that world, realizing the impact that the emotional well-being of a mom has on her physiologic body, or her walk into motherhood post-delivery, has really helped me to see myself and other mothers as a whole being, in that delivery is not just a matter of metrics of, are you dilated? Is your baby safe according to our numbers and standards? And have you had a successful delivery? Because what might be a successful delivery from me on a clinical's perspective, like, okay, all the boxes are checked, it might be a devastating loss for another mom who was convinced that it was going to be a certain way. And now they're struggling with their own sense of loss and their expectations and anticipation. Or maybe they thought birth was going to be really beautiful and it ended up very traumatic. And so framing for other women and other moms, especially if you're newer to the birth community and delivering for the first time, or maybe you had a negative experience and you felt sort of dismissed, like that shouldn't be a big deal. I shouldn't have been worried about that because nobody else seemed to think it was a big deal and just sort of brushed it off as let's just carry on to the next thing. So I think I just learned a lot with Everly's pregnancy. I learned how to advocate for myself. I learned how to speak up. It was when the Zika virus was a big thing. I was supposed to go to Miami, and then there was like this big outbreak in Miami. And I remember having the consult along with the physician. And I try not to be a fear-based decision maker. I try to be like, okay, let's take objective information and make an empowered decision. Because if I'm in a place of fearfulness, I'm not going to make sound decisions. Statistically, the quality of decisions made by people who are in a fear mode versus like, okay, I don't want to put myself or my baby at risk. So let's just reroute and take a different trip, just to think what we ended up doing. But I remember the physician, not one of my favorites. She was like really trying to intimidate me. Like, you don't have to scare me away. You could just empower me with the information, keep it neutral, and make me the decision-making party and me the responsible individual, assuming I have my child's best interest in mind. I don't need to be like coerced into, and I don't want to be. Like, I don't want to be in a conversation with somebody. If you're sitting at coffee with someone and they're coercing you into something, you're like, this doesn't feel nice. I don't like this. Don't let a provider push you or coerce you or intimidate you into a decision. You feel free to go search out, find the information, find the resources, ask them, what are our other alternatives? What else can we do? If you want an early induction, if you want certain testing done, if you want an amniocentesis, if you want just any variety of decisions in the pregnancy and birthing process. So fast forward back into the delivery, I show up, I'm 5 centimeters and I'm really proud of myself. I thought, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to get in the tub and I'm going to just like calm and relax. I'm just going to have this like great planned out experience. Well, it really happened like that. I was not like my previous experience where we just landed at 5 centimeters. I got there. I want to say it was around 10 o'clock at night. And Everly was delivered by 12. And just after the stroke of midnight, 38-0. So they spent about over an hour just trying to get an IV. I can't tell you how many nurses I had in the room because I was so clamped down because I was progressing so quickly during labor, headed into transition, and they couldn't get an IV on me. And so, it was terrible. I am like the walker mover labor lady. I got to be moving. And I had to be in bed and it was awful. They're like, we need you to lay on your side. I'm like, are you kidding me? You want me to lay on my side while a human head tries to burrow its way out my vagina? I don't like that idea, actually. What else can we talk about, right? So like the side lying, hip squeeze, release, I needed that to survive. And I'm so thankful that my doula was like doing all the counter pressure, 2 hands, burrowed down on my hip to open up my pelvis to release the pressure while they are struggling to get an IV. I mean, heck, back to my ICU days, I'm like, dude, just bring in an IO, right? Can we just go intraosseous on this and go into the bone? Like, who has the drill? Who's got the drill? Because in the ICU, they got this little like drill gun and they'll just, and they literally drill a screw into your bone and that's your IV. I'm like, I would have opted for that at that point. That's how much I was hating this IV process. So once they finally landed this IV in me, and by the way, I was GBS positive. So they're like, come to the hospital within 2 hours prior to your delivery. Now they struggled their way like an hour and a half into that IV. And I was posted up. I thought, there was no way I was getting out of that bed to get into a tub. Like it just wasn't happening. We were too far gone for that. So here I am, hands up on this is still my favorite position. I am like an inclined all fours, head of the bed is raised, and I am hands over the head of the bed. And these contractions are just barreling down on me. And I'm like, dude, I said I wanted a natural delivery. And like, that was a dumb idea. What was I thinking? Right. So, but at this point, like, I can't really talk. You get into this like mode where words are very limited and very select. And most of the select words you can choose from aren't things you'd repeat on a podcast. So I'm like struggling, like, how am I going to communicate this? Because the contractions are just pounding me. They're just hitting so quickly back to back. And this doctor, she will go unnamed. She was my least favorite of the whole practice. Of course, you pick your favorites, right? And then there's like 5 women in the group. And I picked an all women's group. So I just felt more comfortable with that. And here she comes in. I'm like, dude, I knew you were going to be on when I needed to deliver this baby. And, you know, that truth be told, she goes off at like midnight. That is like the moment I delivered. So she comes in. She's all snooty and just in her typical attitude. And I was like, epidural. And she's like, oh, I was told that you didn't want an epidural. Did you want to talk about an epidural or did you want to get an epidural? And like, I'm like in my head, like, are you kidding me? Can you ask me a yes or no question? I cannot explain myself. Like, I don't have enough words to. So I am like, through all the mustering of all the strength that I have, I'm like, talk about it. So she's like, well, if you want to talk about an epidural, I need to check you and see how far along you are. I had no idea how far along I was. And so Newbane was what I asked her. She's like, well, I'm going to have to check you. So she checks me while I'm on the incline. And she's like, no, you're like 7.5 centimeters. Like, it's not going to happen. You're too far along. And with Newbane, you know, there is a deadline and all hospital policies are a little bit different, but I think a pretty close standard is like, it has to be given before 7 centimeters. Because after that, it stays in the body system, stays in the baby system, and they just come out kind of lethargic and they don't breathe real great. So she's like, no, you missed your window of opportunity. I'm like, oh shoot, man. Okay. Well, an epidural is like, that's my last option. And I don't think I'm going to make it. It's like in my head, right? I'm like, I can't do this much longer. So she's like, well, in order to properly assess you for an epidural, I need you to turn over and listen. I'm like, you mean I'm going to have to move my whole body? Are you kidding me? I can't do that. She's like, and I just looked at her like, you're out of your mind. And she just looked straight back at me, those 2 little attitude-filled eyes. And she said, Joyanna, right now. And I was like, all right, like if you want to play attitude, I'll turn over right now. Listen, I turned right over and I went from 7.5 to 9. Just rolling over that one contraction, bam. She's like, no, I couldn't get anybody up here fast enough to get you an epidural. Looks like you're going to be delivering naturally. Isn't that what you wanted? I mean, she was so haughty. Like, just like you did this to yourself, you and your ideas of a natural delivery. I'm like, who are you? What is your job here? Like, are you supposed to be empowering me? And she's like, sex being you. That's what I was hearing from her, right? That's what she was communicating. I was like, oh, you little bear. So I went, so go from 7.5 to 9 and just rolling over. She walks out of the room, goes into an emergency C-section delivery. Meanwhile, 30 seconds later, I'm there with the nurse and my doula and my husband. So I had an urge to push before I was dilated all the way. And so I asked her, I feel like I need to push. And she's like, you can't. And I just was like, why not? She's like, because you'll tear your vagina all the way down. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, no problem. I won't be pushing. So here I am like fighting this urge to push, which is a really, 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 really difficult, if not impossible thing, right? Because your whole body and your uterus are involuntarily pushing on your behalf. So it's quite the battle to fight against that. So here I am, like all of my strength, no help from any medication, trying to resist while she walks out, goes, I didn't know she was in an emergency. She didn't say anything. She just walked out. And the nurse checks me again a couple minutes later, and she's like, oh, you're complete. Let me call the doctor. And I was like, I have to push. Like, I cannot hold it. She gets on the phone with the doctor and does like the whole, nurse right next to you, try to be quiet and discreet, hope you don't hear the conversation going on the other side of the phone thing. She turns around and she's like, I'm sorry, you can't push because the doctor's in an emergency right now and we're going to have to wait. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. I have to wait? Like, I can't push. She literally told me, you can't push. And now, like, being a nurse with a little minute of experience, being in that delivery room, I'm like, it's a real bizarre thing to tell somebody they can't push. Unless they all knew, like, if I pushed, that baby was just rolling right out, right? So I tried my darndest and I did some hollering and I kept her in. And the moment I just sent a prayer out to the heavens, like, God, you have got to help me because this is getting crazy. I can't do this another moment. And I just told her, I said, I'm pushing. I can't. So I started pushing. The doctor walked in and sure enough, that baby got stuck. She got stuck coming out. And I just gave her a good hollering at. It was her first time I ever yelled at that baby. I said, get out of me. And that, lo and behold, that did the trick. Everybody just burst out laughing. They're like, I cannot believe this girl just went from praying to yelling at her unborn child, you know? So that's me in a nutshell, all of the craziness you can expect. But she came out, she was healthy. And all in all, I was proud of myself. I remember looking at my husband and being like, that was crazy. That was so wild. Let's do it again. And like, that's literally the conversations I have. Like every time I get over into that postpartum room, like roll me onto the other side and I'm like, oh, that was awesome. That was great. Some women are like terrified of labor, right? And granted, some women have awful experiences. For some reason, I am tremendously motivated by the challenge of the births. So I don't know, Kelly. I mean, you're just nodding your head like, oh, this girl is crazy. I don't know if you knew how crazy I was, but it's legit. Now we're at baby number 4 and I am doing all things in my power to not continue that process of procreating in this current present times.
I mean, I totally feel you. Like, it's like a very empowering process. I've had some mildly traumatic births, but the problem is it's a blessing and a problem at the same time. You've got this little human you got to take care of for the rest of your life. So it's like, how much bandwidth do you have? It's not just that one thing. Exactly. You have to do. I mean, I would love to pop out a million babies and meet every single tiny little creature that I could create.
Exactly.
But
that would be fun.
It's a lot of work afterwards on the back end. So
that's precise.
Totally feel you.
100% commitment.
Yeah. Well, that was baby number 2, though. We've still got a couple more.
My third delivery, that one was, I thought, I didn't love how I was treated with that practice. And they expanded and they brought in like a large group of doctors. And so it was like, I want to say up to maybe 15 physicians in that group. And I thought, that's too broad for me. It wasn't quite what I was looking for. I wanted a chance to go a little more personal. And I'd had several friends who had worked with a midwife before. So I thought, maybe I'll go that route with birth number 3. And I'm all about, at this time I'm working in birth education, educating new couples on all of their options. So I really wanted to learn. I wanted to have a different, fresh experience. So with baby number 3, Solomon, I switched practices and I went to a single practitioner. She was still an OBGYN, but I had heard, and from working at that hospital where I delivered at, I'd worked some postpartum, but then primarily just childbirth education. I'd heard positive things about this woman that I started working with, and that she had come from a more midwife, or more practice more like a midwife rather. That's what I had heard. It was not actually my experience. The crazy thing about that practice was that every visit you saw the nurse practitioner, except for like maybe 3 visits you met the actual OB that would be delivering. So you have she's an awesome nurse practitioner I'm working with. And I had felt like the NP really knew me. She and I actually had crossed paths working ICU together. So we had this kind of like coworker friend bond thing going on too, before she had moved into women's health. And I start the whole drill of prodromal labor again. And I'm like, man, I'm in labor. I'm not in labor. But in all the conversations and doing the contraction checks, I felt it wears at you mentally, right? I felt kind of dumb. I feel like I'm overreacting. I feel like, oh, these are just Braxton Hicks. Why am I so sensitive to them? But with Solomon, we were in the middle of a full home remodel while my husband was in school. Meanwhile, while I'm working and have 2 toddlers at home. So I had a tremendous volume of stress and a low volume of support. And I just remember sitting on the floor, having contractions 2 to 3 minutes apart. And this went on for 10 weeks. 10 weeks of, I don't know if I'm going to have a preterm baby. Oh, we've made it and just past viability. Okay, we're at this point. So it's this constant checking of, and I know, women who have gone through that experience of feeling like maybe their cervix isn't favorable and is constantly trying to prematurely dilate, right? So it's so much of an emotional battle because I don't want to not say something and I quickly progress into labor, as many of our preterm deliveries do, where it's all of a sudden the surprise, this tiny little person comes down the slippery slope, and then you're not in a place where you can safely deliver and the baby has the emergency care that they need. So you didn't want to be like under cautious and coming from a nursing background, try to like figure it all out by myself. So I started taking all these supplements from a natural health clinic that I had been working through. And meanwhile, like right before my pregnancy with Solomon, I was ill for 12 months. I was just finally recovered. The month I delivered him, I realized, wow, I finally actually recovered from this illness. So my body was under so much stress too. And I remember going in and getting testing done, and they're like, Joyanna, we've never put someone on this many supportive supplements for your uterus, but like I was taking 19 pills a day to keep contractions to where I was not in labor. And so I'm calling, I'm like, okay, what are my options here? What are all of my options? The only option that particular practice could give me was basically taking it was the equivalent of a Valium. And like, okay, I have young kids at home. And when I'm stressed and they're like, just rest more and take this pill that's going to make you so drowsy. But also in my head, I'm like, also, I can't remember exactly what it is. You'll probably remember, Kelly, but it dries up your milk supply. So I'm like, okay, I could totally shoot myself in the foot if I do need to produce breast milk for this kid. I'm not going to be capable of taking care of other children, which doesn't work because I have 2 children full-time at home, and just rest more. And I was like, I can't rest more. Like I'm doing everything that I can to prevent myself from going into preterm labor. So it was really frustrating. I definitely got more help from the natural health side of it, but I had to go in because I was on so many pills. I had to go in 2 times a week to get rechecked to make sure that everything was okay. So that was really, really exhausting. So because it's that long battle, and because I was working primarily with the NP, when I finally did go into labor, no one believed me. Nobody believed that I was in labor. Not my husband, not my doctor, barely even myself. And I woke up the night before. I couldn't sleep. I was restless back and forth. I woke up at 5 a.m. and I took a video of this. Oh, I remember this too. The second round, I told you I have to have my nails done and a haircut. So I was set to get my hair done, but the appointments had gotten switched around. So it was a Wednesday night. I was frustrated. I'd been working on Happily Mom all day at a coffee shop, and I left early because I'm like, man, I know this is it. I know I'm in labor. And I was just texting my doula. I'm like, I don't know. I think this is it. My mom was supposed to come up and watch my other kids. So whenever it was time, she just kept asking me, are you sure you're in labor? I'm like, Mom, you're only an hour and a half away. Is it really a big deal if you just come up? And I'm like, well, I don't know if I'm in labor. I have contractions and they're every 2 to 3 minutes apart. And it's been going on for the last 4 to 5 hours. So they're regular, they're consistent, they're getting stronger. So they're following all the rules of labor. But I can't guarantee you it's not going to go away because I know that that's what my body does. So here it's 6 40 on Wednesday night. And I was just so frustrated. And my husband's like, I know what you need to do. You need to go get your hair cut. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you have to go get your hair cut. That's your thing. I know it'll encourage you. It'll take your mind off of things. Just go get your hair cut. So I pull up the salon. It closes at 7. I don't have an appointment. I get in the car. I take a video of myself driving to the salon because this is why I'm on Happily Mom. I'm like, okay, at some point, if this whole thing pans out, maybe somebody will appreciate this whole birth story and feel encouraged that they're not crazy and insane. So I take these little snippets. I stroll up to that salon, fully pregnant, totally in distress. And the contractions, they're light enough that I'm comfortable, breathe through them. I can handle early labor. I've done this before. And I tell the ladies, I'm like, ladies, I'm in early labor. In order to be ready, I have to have a haircut. I know you're about to close. Is there just any way that you would be willing to cut my hair? And they were like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're here. It was like I was a celebrity walking into the salon. They stayed late. They took pictures with me. They shared the story on their social media. They felt like that they were superheroes. And it was so fun because here I have this great haircut. And I think that's all my body needed because next morning I went full on into labor and, things just, they progressed. My friend came over at 1 o'clock. I call her, hey, come take care of my kids. And she was like, you sure you don't need to go in the hospital? I'm moaning through contractions, oh. She's like, oh, I feel nervous being here with you. You should go. I call my husband, hey, babe, I think we're ready to go. It's no, I got an hour left of work. And I was just really hoping that I could finish. You sure that you're in labor? Or could I come in an hour? You think it'd be a big deal? So, well, I'm happy to drive myself to the hospital, in my head thinking you jerk. I just called you to tell you I think that I need to go to the hospital. Of course I think that I need to go to the hospital. I would love for you to call him home. He's like, okay. I'll come. He comes home reluctantly. My friend takes the kids. We'll go to the doctor because I'm I don't want to go in and get checked. I'm let's just go to the doctor and get checked. So I call him. I'm hey, can I come in and get checked? She checks me out. The day before I had a cervical exam. It was 2 centimeters and 50% effaced. I go in this time, 2.5 centimeters, 90% effaced. I was verbalizing through my contractions. I really felt them. She looks at me because I put on makeup. I was if I'm going to have a baby, I have to have my makeup done too. It's just part of me. Okay. It's goofy, but it works for me. She looks at me. She goes, you know how I can tell you're not in labor? Because you have makeup on. If you were really in labor looks like standing naked outside and not caring. That's labor. I don't think you're going to go into labor for the next 24 hours. And my husband latched onto that 24 hours as if it was God himself speaking. It will be 24 hours. So we go home. I'm totally defeated. I'm so frustrated. I'm so frustrated. I'm I don't even know if I can't tell if I'm having contractions, if I can't tell I'm in labor, what do I even know? And he's like, let's go get the kids. I was and in that moment, that surge, that emotional demand for companionship that comes through that moving into active labor stage where you become this I need to have someone with me, right? That's one of our markers that, you're progressing forward in labor. This is the emotional shift and change that I just knew in that moment. Now looking back at what I know, I thought, that was the marker. That's when things kicked up a gear. I was I can't. I started to feel panicky. I cannot be by myself. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. He's well, I have this assignment that's due for school. So come to school with me. So this man has the audacity, my husband, who I love dearly, has the audacity to drive me to his engineering program, sit in a computer lab while I am trying not to verbalize through my contractions until I get to a point where I cannot sit down. And I'm walking around pacing. Meanwhile, the other students in this computer lab are what is going on? A bunch of single men. It was uncomfortable. I was hey, we got to get out of here. I'm really uncomfortable. He's okay, we could go now. I just finished my assignment. I'm oh my gosh, this is crazy. So fast forward, we go pick up the kids. We come home. I have no diapers in the house. Still no one thinks that I'm in labor. I'm I know I'm in labor, but I was tired of arguing at that point. I'm maybe I am crazy. We'll just find out. I send him out to get diapers because I'm someone's going to come stay with my kids for 3 days. I can't bring him here and have no diapers. While he's gone, Sure, I kick into high gear. It's like 8, 9 o'clock at night. We put the kids to bed and I am pacing. I'm on all fours. Like I need hands-on engagement, but he doesn't think I'm in labor. He keeps trying to convince me I need to go to bed because the contractions will go away. I'm texting my doula. I can't go into labor. I'm so exhausted. I just can't. I don't even have the strength to have a baby tonight. And so she's like, well, I guess not. And really, if you have a doula who, if you're texting her that and she won't even get on the phone with you and call you to actually hear your voice, because I tell you what, I can walk into a room. If I hear a woman's voice, I can tell you what stage of labor she's in. You can just tell once you've been around it enough. And that was so frustrating for me that she didn't do that. And this was our second delivery together. And I worked with her as a coworker in birth education. She didn't. She just did the texting. She starts texting my husband when he gets home. He tries to put on Spider-Man, y'all. Spider-Man. I hate Marvel. I'm that girl. I don't like it. Star Wars, Marvel, I hate it. He's like, I think you just need to watch Spider-Man, get your mind off of things. Here I'm on the birthing ball and I'm like, and he's like, just watch some Spider-Man. It'll make you feel better. Keep going. Just go to bed. So he texts me into bed. I'm like, this is so dumb. I'm like, well, I need to go to the hospital. Like, we need to call to get like the babysitter here. He's like, no, I think you're making a mistake. I'm like literally calling the babysitter, like, please come. He's like, I think you're making a mistake. I just hung up the phone. I was like, that's it. I'm not going to tell you anything anymore. If I have this baby in this house by myself, we have a baby in the house. So I'm in the shower. He gets on the phone with the doula. My contractions at this point are 59 seconds apart. Okay. We are like a 1-minute cycle. And she's like, are they consistent? Well, he looks at that little contraction timer and I'm in the shower. I'm just like hollering at this point. And he looks at and he's an engineer. So he's thinking 1 minute, 11 seconds, 1 minute, 1 second, 59 seconds. No, they're not consistent because they're not exactly the same. Right. So yet again, my doula is like basing her information off of somebody who is thinking like extra specifically consistent. No, they're not consistent. Is this different than the contraction she was having on Monday? He's like, is this different than the contractions you're having on Monday? I'm like, I can't even talk to you. I can't talk. Like they're literally so intense. And she goes, is that her in the background? And I was like, finally, somebody hears me. I am so close to delivering this baby. I put on a bathrobe. Walk upstairs for the final time because he's convinced that I need to go to bed. My husband is convinced I need to go to bed. And I just have no fight left in me because all of my personhood is bent on delivering this child. And my son has woken up and he is trying to feed me snacks and give me water and comfort me in the bed with me. So cute and precious. He's like, Mommy, need a beef stick? And so then my water breaks and I just start screaming. Because I know I knew the baby was like right there. And my water does not break until I am literally delivering my child. And Abe goes, oh shit. And that's when he realized you are literally about to deliver. We have no babysitter. We have 2 children to put into the car. It's 11:40 at night. There are no neighbors awake to come and watch our children. And I start coming down those stairs with a baby coming out between my legs in a bathrobe, fully naked on the steps, no shoes. Well, he is like scrambling to get the kids out of bed to throw them into the car. I don't even know if there were seatbelts or I have no idea what's happening. And I'm on the phone. I have 2 options. I either call the OB, who was a total jerk to me and totally blew me off and try to convince me I wasn't in labor. Okay. Who told me that I wouldn't be in labor unless I was outside naked. And now I am literally outside on my front porch naked. Okay. Quite literally came to pass. Do I call her and tell her I'm coming in? Or do I call 911 and try to get a ride to this hospital so that I don't deliver on my front porch? And so I called 911. And the lady is like, so you think you're going to have the baby? I'm like, I am having a baby. I'm having a baby, right? Like there's no, she's like, I could have someone there in like 10 minutes. And I was like, I can get to the hospital in 6 minutes if we go like 90 miles an hour. So I was like, I'm going to try it. And we drove and I pushed in the car involuntarily because there was no holding that baby back. Meanwhile, my doula is like coaching my husband through. She's like, so if she starts grunting, like tell her to cough. cough, don't push. So like other little tidbit for the mamas, cough. If someone tells you not to push, you engage an opposite muscle group and it will slow your body down. I pushed in the car. I called, because I was currently working at the hospital, I called the ER and it's like, you have to notify them, right? Because dispatch sends a notification out to the ER from, I was working in the float pool at the time. So I was familiar with how inbound patients would come. They'd have dispatch. I was like, I know if I just stroll up in here, I'm not going to have any help because the team hasn't had time to assemble. So I call the ER myself, and my husband, I dialed the number. I don't know how I remembered it. I dialed the number. My husband is like, hello, my name is Abraham. And I just looked at him like, are you kidding me? He was so calm the whole time, mind you. So calm, which is wonderful, and why I love him so dearly. But there are times where like you can't be calm. Like you have to be like, communicate the urgency of the matter. I grab the phone. I yell at the person in the ER, other inbound phone. I said, I am having a baby. We will be inbound in 60 seconds. I need your labor and delivery team on site. Meet me at the car. This child is literally coming out. And so we pull up. There's some fool parked right in between. Like, I can't even get there. And my husband is like, I think it'll be just a minute. I am just like losing it. I like reach over, scrambling, honking the horn, like, get out of the way. It's an emergency. Then Pete comes out to the car, asks me to stand up. I had a pair of underwear on, apparently. Asked me to stand up. He's like, ma'am, I think I'm going to need to take your underwear down. I'm in a robe, right? So it's just whole me, hugely pregnant, naked body, about to have a baby on the sidewalk. There's a lady smoking a cigarette in a wheelchair staring at me like, this is the craziest thing I've seen all night, sitting outside the ER. And a man getting out of a cab, drunk as could be. And I'm like, wow, I am really the party for everybody at the ER today. And he checks me, the ER NP checks me, and this look of terror goes off his face. And he's like, ma'am, I'm going to need you to sit down right now. Sit down. And right then my legs went out where I couldn't hold myself up. So both men like leaned me up against the car. And these two, was like some from a movie. These two nurses come rolling out with a stretcher. And as they're like running with the wheelchair, he yells at them like, I need a stretcher. So they like whip around, go grab a stretcher, come roll me out. And they all hoist me, carry me onto the stretcher, and literally race me down the ER corridor to the trauma bay that I used to work in while I was working float pool. And I'm like, oh, great. Like, we're delivering in a trauma bay. And I am all out, hollering my head off. We are delivering this baby naturally because nobody got any time to do anything else. And we're just so thankful at this point that I'm not delivering on the sidewalk. And we've actually made it in. The doctor stands at the very door, which these trauma bays are pretty big. So the door is far way off. He puts his spectacles down. And I kid you not, he had spectacles, like the ones that have the little extender on the end of them, puts them down on the end of his nose like this. And he goes, we've got at least 1 minute. And he's like, take her upstairs. And I was like, upstairs? This is the 9th floor, mind you. We have to go to the 9th floor. The 9th floor to deliver this baby. Lord have mercy. And I am like just trying to tear this bathrobe off of me. I'm so hot and I'm so about to deliver a baby. I don't know anyone there. Of course I don't. My OB doesn't even know that I'm coming. My husband's in the car with the kids. And here they are, wheel me, fully naked, legs up, spread eagle, pushing a baby out down the ER again into the elevator. I start pushing. I tell the men, like, I'm pushing. Okay, honey, whatever you need to do, you're going to be okay. I'm like, whatever. Y'all never deliver, baby. You don't have any idea what's going on, So roll me up in there. They pull me over onto the bed, and thank God somebody actually looked at me because everybody was just hurrying around. I mean, you've seen these, what they call them, precipitous deliveries, where it's just like fierce and you just scramble to get all of your ducks in a row. There was no warmer set up. There was no IV. There was nothing. Within 3 minutes of arrival at the hospital, he was out. And I delivered the head. Thankfully, the resident was there. And he just very calmly sat at the end of the bed. He looked at me and I said, I'm pushing. And he said, okay, honey, whatever you need to do. And he's the only person in the entire room who actually made eye contact with me And then after the head came out, and I was out right before the head came out, I was yelling at him. I was like, I really wanted perineal support because the last thing I wanted was to go through this whole crazy labor and then tear wide open, right? By just pushing without any support. So I just kept saying to him, like, perineal support. And he's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Like, I'll support your perineum so you don't bust open. And right as the head came out, my doula, I looked over and she was right at the head of my bed. And I was like so encouraged. It's like, at least I know one person in this delivery room right now. About 5 minutes after the delivery, the OB walked in. My husband walked in right behind her. And you know what she said to me? Were you trying to have a home birth? So indignant, so irritated. She was so irritated with me. Why didn't you call me sooner? I thought, I cannot even believe you right now. And when I went for my postpartum follow-up appointment, the NP told me, she said, oh no, like, I know your story. I know your births and your deliveries. From what you told me, I knew when you walked in earlier today that you were going to deliver that baby. And I thought, regardless of you being 2 centimeters, that we should send you straight to the hospital and not have sent you home. She said, but she didn't want to do that because she didn't think that you were in labor. So, 4th baby, I had a home birth. So we could just plan to have him at home, since I knew I wasn't ever going to be able to tell when I was in labor. And it went great.
Can I just tell you, though, the 90% effaced should have been the clue.
I mean, maybe on a third time, a third baby, especially someone who's been in prodromal labor for 10 weeks. Like, the cervix was
history
clutter,
matters.
right?
Oh, my goodness.
So that's it. That's all my stories.
Oh, my gosh. You went through everything.
Not at all.
How far apart were your babies?
On average, I got pregnant 15 months postpartum.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to lay down and process.
Oh my gosh. I know. I mean, there's four deliveries is a lot of deliveries anyways. But yeah, so
I mean, yeah.
That's part of why I became such a advocate for my patients. And even, you saw that when we were working together in labor and delivery, was wanting to create space where they not only were given information to be able to understand the different things that you're going through in a birth journey and the labor process, but then also to not feel like pressured into one way of doing things, because I've had so many different experiences, different people, different intervention, and have gone through sort of that like big picture gamut. And now, having been on the inside as a labor and delivery nurse, walking with moms, it's just, there is no one way to do it. And there's not one right way to do it or one wrong way to do it. Well, I do think there is a wrong way to do it. I think stripping a mom of the information she needs, coercing her into a decision she doesn't feel comfortable with, and projecting what you think should happen versus freely allowing her to lead the charge, I think that would be a wrong way to do it.
I think that also lends itself to moms making decisions through fear and through defensiveness. And that's what I feel like that's how we've gotten where we are in obstetrics at this point. And really the reason that I'm doing this podcast, because I feel like so many people come in with very defensive wishes to fight for their rights, which is scary, because if you have one person fighting one battle and the other person fighting the other battle, nobody's winning. We're not focused on what's important, which is having a safe and healthy delivery. And like you said, there's no right way to do it, but we can talk about each step as we go and make informed decisions. When there's an emergency, then you communicate that. Right. You, like your doctor said, your baby is safe right now, but if your baby's ever to a point where it's not safe, I'm going to tell you. I had a very similar experience. I think we talked about this at some point when we were working together, that surprise episiotomy.
Oh, yeah.
They kind of tell you, but you're like not computing because they're a little cagey about it.
And there's so much pressure and other things going on. You're not like, it's sort of like, oh, wait.
And you're like, yeah. Right. And maybe it's necessary, but that's not the way to communicate it. I had an episiotomy with both my kids. The first one, I actually requested my medical records because that was just something that stuck with me. It was New York. There's only one practice at that hospital. It's the house practice. And I think there was 20 physicians or something crazy. And the one that I got, I loved speaking with her and her bedside manner, and everything except for a couple things were a little annoying. But overall, I did not have very many complaints other than the fact that every patient I'd ever gotten from her had an episiotomy. Right. So I felt just irritated by that. But I went back and I looked at my records, and so both my kids were born occiput transverse. So they were never really in the right position to come out. I agree with the decision to do the episiotomy, but the way she worded it, I'm going to make a little more room for your baby. And me, I'm thinking there are ways to sort of manipulate
the perineum,
the baby, and manipulate the space and that kind of thing. And I thought that's what she meant, but she was literally just getting out a pair of scissors.
and see, that's not actually informing somebody, because no, in informed consent, you and I get them all the time, right? It is, right. Here is the stated procedure is going to be this, and you have to call it what it is. You can't just like go in and do a colon resection and be like, we're going to like snip a little bit off of your insides. Like you have to say what this thing is. And that has to be like written explicitly by name onto the consent, which then becomes a contract.
Yeah, I agree with the fact that I did need an episiotomy. I just would have appreciated an explanation and being told what it was that was happening, because it wasn't until I got up to the floor that I was working on, which was postpartum at the time, where my coworker said, oh, wow, you had a 2nd-degree internal laceration and an episiotomy? And I was like, what? Oh, my.
Yeah. It's almost like you don't understand the scope of it until you're in the middle of it and you're working on the other side of it. And I think that's where I felt so alarmed, because I was like, well, I knew what I had heard from other moms. I knew some of the chatter, but as a new mom, you're like, I don't know who to believe or what's legit, or you're just kind of confused. You don't know which way's up. Then I worked in childbirth education. So then you have, again, another tier of proximity because you're not actually in the room. So I was really curious to see, okay, I've heard from all these people who are in the room, what's going on. Now actually being the one in the room, watching how these decisions are playing out. And I had worked postpartum before that as well. So you see them like after it's happened, but being actually in where the decisions are being made and how the decisions are being made. I think that's why so many women do come in and are so guarded against the medical system, because you feel like you have to overfight. And we've seen and experienced where women have been run over. Their opinions have been sort of pushed to the side. There's gaslighting. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it is the mindset. And I saw it's a lot in education, which was crazy to me, that the physician knows what needs to happen. So I'm just going to let them make the decisions, and I'm going to sort of take this back seat. And that's fine until you feel like, I don't know. I just don't feel right. Something feels off about that. But you haven't educated yourself. And getting an education on birth is not supposed to happen while you're in labor. That needs to happen well before, so that you know the questions to ask. You understand the different options. You understand the different options, right? Like we have to, as women, inform ourselves. And I think if you come in and you feel powerless, you're going to be defensive. And if you feel like maybe I'm not going to be heard, or maybe, I don't know, I kind of feel like I should push back, but I don't know. I kind of feel dumb for pushing back at this. And I kind of feel like you think I'm dumb, or you're treating me like I'm dumb for pushing back at this. So I think there's a lot of growth to be done on both sides, where birth feels like a safe place. And you feel like moms feel heard. Their concerns feel heard. We're giving them the information and understanding this is your body and your baby. And we're here as a team to enable you and your baby to safely navigate through this. I think if just the shift of the mindset, just real subtle, that the shift of the mindset would let a lot of guard down. And I think that's where, with my home birth experience, it felt like that. because through the whole pregnancy, we established that platform. Through all the prenatal visits, we established that platform. So by the time it came to deliver the baby, and I had a lot of preterm labor with that one as well, then I didn't feel like I was fighting. But even having worked in the hospital and have had 3 hospital births and being very well educated, when I did have to go into the hospital for the preterm labor to do a labor check, I felt like a lot of those moms. I felt defensive and I felt kind of attacked. I felt kind of demeaned because I was going a different route that a lot of times the medical community will say, oh, I don't know, home birth, kind of sketchy. We do things differently. And so it's sort of this like implied, I already have to be defensive because you don't think that I'm smart or you don't like what I'm doing. I feel like an outsider here. So versus like, hey, there's different ways to have babies. The goal is having a baby and I'm here as a teammate to help you. And the way I do things, I'm not going to just put on you how I think you should do it. Let's make a decision that you feel confident about. I think that would be a great pivot and growth point in the OB community.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of information to digest. And I think it's a lot of very important things that women need to know about. And, we need to have a conversation with the medical community and women and try to just do better so that we all have better experiences because it's stressful on both sides. Well, thank you very much, Joyanna.
Thanks for having me.
To help more moms find this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and leave a review to tell me what you think. To find more information about guests from each episode, please see the show notes at birthjourneyspodcast.buzzsprout.com. There, you can also learn how to follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you for listening. I'm honored to be a part of your birth journey. Thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes. Don't forget to share the podcast with a friend who can benefit from the valuable insights that we share here. And if you could take a moment to leave a 5-star rating and review, it would mean the world to me. If you're ready to work one-on-one with me to embark on a transformational journey towards a confident and empowered hospital birth experience, go to kellyhof.com/empowered and enroll in my Empowered Hospital Birth Coaching Program. Together, we'll create a roadmap to a birth experience that you'll cherish forever. That's KELLYHOF.com/empowered. Let's make your birth experience extraordinary.